5 names, just 5 names, and one of the most brutal internal rebellions Washington has seen in a decade exploded into the open. March 4th, 2026, House Oversight Committee, 2:30 in the afternoon. Nobody walked into that room expecting what was about to happen. The agenda was something else entirely. Epstein's name wasn't even on the official program that morning. But when Nancy Mace walked toward the microphone, everyone in that room felt the air change. She was carrying emotion, and her target was her own party's Attorney General. The vote came back 24-19. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, appointed by a Republican administration, confirmed by a Republican Senate, was subpoenaed by her own party's committee, with 5 of her own Republicans pulling the trigger. 5 people who had spent years building their careers on loyalty to the same movement that put Bondi in her chair. 5 people who looked at what the Department of Justice had done with the Epstein files and decided that enough was enough. They didn't cross the aisle quietly. They crossed it in front of cameras, in front of journalists, in front of the entire country. And when the gavel came down, Bondi was standing alone in a way that no attorney general wants to stand alone. You need to understand what that means. In Washington, party discipline is the oxygen that keeps political careers alive. You vote with your team, you protect your people, you absorb the uncomfortable truths, and you move forward together. Breaking that code doesn't happen on accident. It doesn't happen because of a momentary disagreement. It happens when something has gone so wrong, so visibly, so undeniably wrong, that staying silent becomes more dangerous than speaking. And that is exactly what happened on March 4th. 5 Republicans looked at the evidence in front of them, looked at Bondi's record, looked at what the DOJ had done and not done, and decided that the political cost of loyalty was now higher than the political cost of rebellion. This story did not begin on March 4th. That's the thing you have to understand. What you saw that afternoon was the final explosion of a fuse that had been burning for more than a year. And if you want to understand why 5 Republicans abandoned their own attorney general on live television, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the moment when Pam Bondi sat in front of a Fox News camera, looked into the lens, and made a promise she could not keep. It was early 2025. Bondi had just taken office. The country was watching. Epstein's name had been in the headlines for years. The questions about his network, his associates, the powerful people who surrounded him and somehow walked away untouched. And Bondi went on Fox News and said something that electrified millions of people. She said the list of Epstein's associates was sitting on her desk right now for review. That sentence traveled across the internet in hours. People who had spent years demanding accountability thought the moment had finally arrived. Someone was finally going to do something. Someone with the power of the entire Justice Department behind them was finally going to open the doors and let the truth walk out. They waited. Months passed. Nothing came out that anyone hadn't already seen. No charges, no names that shocked anyone, no evidence that the vast machinery of the DOJ was actually turning in the direction of justice for Epstein's victims. And then Congress decided to act on its own. In November 2025, lawmakers passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act by an overwhelming bipartisan majority. The law was simple and direct. The DOJ had to release all of its investigative files on Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell within 30 days. Not some of them, not the ones the department found convenient, all of them. Trump signed the bill into law. The clock started ticking. The deadline came, and the DOJ blinked. When the release date arrived, the department published only a tiny fraction of what it held. It asked for more time. 2 weeks after the deadline, less than 1% of the files had been made public. The law that Congress had passed nearly unanimously was being ignored by the very administration that had signed it. Lawmakers on both sides were furious. The people who had voted for this law, who had built their political identities around demanding Epstein accountability, were watching the Justice Department treat a congressional mandate like a suggestion it could get to eventually, maybe, when it felt like it. Then came January 30th, 2026. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche stood up and announced that 3.5 million pages of documents had been released. He said this constituted full compliance with the law. He said these were the last remaining documents that had not yet been made public. Case closed, he implied. Move along. But in the same breath, Blanche acknowledged that approximately 3 million more documents existed and would not be released. The justification was attorney-client privilege, deliberative process privilege, work product doctrine. Legal language stacked on top of legal language to explain why millions of pages of documents about a convicted sex trafficker and his network would remain locked away from the public that had a legal right to see them. Thomas Massey heard that explanation and went straight to his keyboard. Ro Khanna heard it and did the same. Both of them had co-authored the Epstein Transparency Act. Both of them had spent months pushing the DOJ to comply. And both of them said the same thing in response to Blanche's announcement. They're breaking the law, not bending it, not interpreting it creatively, breaking it. Massey and Khanna then did something that almost no member of Congress had done. They walked into the DOJ's reading room on February 9th and reviewed the unredacted files themselves. They came out and spoke to the press. What they said was not reassuring. Khanna was so disturbed by what he had read that he went to the House floor on February 10th and read the names of 6 men who appeared in the unredacted documents. 6 men, on the record, in Congress, names that had not been in the public releases. And still the department said it was in compliance. Then came February 11th, Bondi's appearance before the House Judiciary Committee. If March 4th was the explosion, February 11th was the moment someone lit the match and threw it into the room. You need to picture what that hearing room looked like that morning. Every seat was taken. Journalists lined the back walls. And behind the members of Congress, in the public gallery, sat the survivors, real women, real people who had lived through what Jeffrey Epstein's network had done to them, who had spent years waiting for the government to treat their suffering as something worth pursuing. They were there that morning because they wanted answers. They sat in those seats because they believed, or maybe just hoped, that the person at the witness table would look at them and feel some weight of obligation. Pam Bondi walked in with her lawyers, sat down, and proceeded to deliver one of the most combative congressional performances anyone in that room could remember. Democratic Representative Pramila Jayapal made her opening move early. She asked the Epstein survivors in the gallery to stand up. And then she turned to Bondi and challenged her to apologize, not just for the abuse the survivors had suffered, which Bondi had already addressed, but for the DOJ's failure to properly redact their names when the files were made public, exposing intimate personal details to the world. Bondi declined. She did not turn around. She did not look at the women who had stood up behind her. She declined to apologize and moved on. The questions kept coming, and the answers kept not arriving. How many of Epstein's alleged co-conspirators had the DOJ indicted? 0. Would the department create a joint task force to give state attorneys general access to the evidence so they could build their own cases? No answer. When did the DOJ decide not to investigate Lex Wexner as a co-conspirator and why? No answer. Who at the department signed off on Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer? No answer. Whether the department would recommend a pardon for Maxwell? No answer. 15 questions. 15 times Bondi found a way to say something without saying anything. And then the hearing stopped being a hearing and became something else entirely. Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the committee, told Bondi at the outset not to waste a single second of their time. He told her he had seen her performance in the Senate and that this committee would not accept evasion. He told her to give direct answers. Bondi had apparently decided before she walked in the door that she would not. When Raskin tried to cut her off to protect the time allotted to Democratic members, when he tried to stop her from filibustering through answers that went nowhere, Bondi turned on him. She looked at one of the most prominent Democratic lawyers in Congress and said, "You don't tell me anything." Then she said it louder, "You washed-up loser lawyer," in a congressional hearing, on camera, with the survivors sitting behind her. It did not get better from there. Thomas Massey, a Republican who had co-authored the very law Bondi was supposed to be complying with, confronted her about the DOJ's redaction failures. He pointed out the contradiction at the center of everything. The department had over-redacted information that could identify potential enablers of abuse, while simultaneously under-redacting the names and personal details of the survivors themselves. Bondi's response to her fellow Republican, who had spent months fighting for this transparency, she called him a hypocrite. She brought up a vote he had made on unrelated legislation. She said he had Trump derangement syndrome. She said he was a failed politician. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Bondi talked about the stock market. Jerry Nadler asked her how many of Epstein's co-conspirators the DOJ was pursuing. Bondi's answer involved the strong performance of financial markets under the current administration. Nadler stared at her. The room stared at her. The cameras kept rolling. When that hearing ended, Nancy Mace did not go home. She went to the Department of Justice and reviewed the Epstein materials herself. She came back and said what Massey and Khanna had said weeks earlier. Documents were missing. Redactions were excessive in places where they should not have been excessive, and absent in places where they were desperately needed. And some things that should have been there simply were not there at all. Mace had seen enough. She started building the motion. While she was building it, more information was emerging about what exactly the DOJ had and had not released. It came out that the department had pulled 47,635 files from its publicly accessible archive. Among the removed files were documents related to allegations involving Trump and administration officials. The DOJ's explanation was that these files had been temporarily taken offline for review due to concerns about nudity and other sensitive content, and that they were being republished on a rolling basis. Critics pointed out that the timing and the specific content of what was removed created questions that demanded direct answers. Then on March 5th, one day after the subpoena vote, the DOJ released 16 additional pages it had previously withheld. The department's explanation was that these documents had been incorrectly coded as duplicative. The content of those 16 pages was not minor. They contained 3 FBI interview summaries from 2019 with a woman who made allegations that Trump had sexually abused her when she was a minor. Trump has never been charged with any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein and has denied knowledge of Epstein's crimes. But the existence of those documents and the fact that they had been withheld while the department claimed full compliance with the law raised questions that the 16-page release did not answer. And NPR reported, after reviewing the department's public database, that 37 additional files still appeared to be missing entirely. 3 million documents released, 47,000 temporarily removed, 16 pages quietly added after public pressure, 37 files still unaccounted for in the database. And through all of it, Bondi insisting that the department was in full compliance with the law, while the people who wrote that law said the opposite. This was the landscape on the morning of March 4th when Nancy Mace walked into that hearing room. The committee's official agenda had nothing to do with Epstein. The chairman, James Comer, actually tried to stop what was coming. When Mace introduced her motion, Comer announced that he had just spoken to Bondi's chief of staff, who had agreed to allow committee members to come to the DOJ for a private briefing with Bondi on the files. He was offering Mace an off-ramp. She didn't take it. She called the vote. And then the Republicans started voting. Tim Burchett of Tennessee voted yes. Lauren Boebert of Colorado voted yes. Michael Cloud of Texas voted yes. Scott Perry of Pennsylvania voted yes. And Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who had introduced the motion, voted yes. Every Democrat on the committee voted yes. The final count was 24-19. The subpoena passed. Mace walked out of that room and spoke to reporters. She said she had a lot more questions, and she did not expect to be talking about the stock market. She said Bondi better not bring those notes when she comes to the Oversight Committee. It was a direct reference to what everyone in Washington had watched on February 11th, Bondi pivoting from questions about dead victims and unprosecuted predators to the performance of the Dow Jones. Mace wasn't just issuing a subpoena. She was serving notice that this deposition would be different, that there would be no filibustering, no pivots, no escape routes built out of talking points about the greatest president in American history. What happens now is a closed-door deposition, recorded on video, to be released to the public afterward. Bondi will sit across from members of the Oversight Committee with no audience to perform for, no gallery to play to, no Democrats to attack on camera as a distraction from the questions she doesn't want to answer. Just her, the members, and the questions. The same questions that went unanswered on February 11th. The same questions the survivors in that gallery came to hear answered. The same questions that 5 Republicans decided were important enough to break party discipline for. There is one detail about this subpoena that almost nobody is talking about, and it is the most important detail of all. The agency responsible for enforcing a congressional subpoena against Pam Bondi is the Department of Justice. The department Pam Bondi runs, if she chooses not to comply, the mechanism that would compel her compliance is the institution she controls. This is not a procedural footnote. It goes to the center of what this moment is really about, which is not just the Epstein files. It is the question of whether the rule of law applies to the people who are supposed to enforce it. Whether a law passed nearly unanimously by Congress, signed by the president, can simply be ignored by the executive agency responsible for carrying it out. Whether an attorney general can refuse to answer questions from lawmakers, insult them on camera, redirect to unrelated topics, and then walk away without consequence. The 5 Republicans who voted for this subpoena are saying the answer to that question has to be no. They are saying that the people who demand accountability from everyone else cannot be permanently exempt from accountability themselves. They are saying that the survivors who sat in that gallery on February 11th, who stood up when asked and then watched Bondi refuse to turn and face them, deserve something more than a carefully managed document release that the people who wrote the transparency law say doesn't come close to what the law actually requires. Nancy Mace put it plainly after the vote. The Epstein case, she said, is one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. His global sex trafficking network is larger than what is being revealed. 3 million documents have been released and we still don't have the full truth. Videos are missing, audio is missing, logs are missing. We want to know why the DOJ is more focused on shielding the powerful than delivering justice. Those words came from a Republican who voted for this subpoena, a Republican who stood in front of cameras and called her own party's Justice Department a machine for protecting the powerful. 5 names: Nancy Mace, Tim Burchett, Lauren Boebert, Michael Cloud, Scott Perry. 5 Republicans who looked at what had happened in that hearing room on February 11th, looked at the 47,000 removed files, looked at the 16 pages that were withheld and then quietly released after pressure, looked at the 37 files still missing from the public database, looked at a law that Congress passed and an administration that signed it and a department that said it was complying while the law's own authors said it wasn't, and decided that the vote they were about to cast mattered more than the party they belonged to. The subpoena is real. The deposition is coming. And Pam Bondi, who walked into the Judiciary Committee on February 11th, flanked by lawyers and armed with talking points and ready to run out the clock, will eventually have to sit down in a room where running out the clock is not an option. What she says in that room, or refuses to say, will tell us everything we need to know about whether the most powerful law enforcement office in the United States is actually subject to the law. 92 seconds of silence nobody needs to manufacture anymore. The silence is already built into the record. It's in every unanswered question from February 11th. It's in every file that was removed and not explained. It's in the 16 pages that were withheld until they weren't. It's in the 37 files that the database still doesn't show. And it's in the 5 Republican votes that echoed through that committee room on March 4th and told the country that even the people who were supposed to be on Bondi's side have stopped being willing to pretend they don't see what they see. The date for the deposition has not been set, but it is coming, and this time there is no gallery to perform for, no Democrats to attack, no stock market numbers to redirect toward, just the questions. And whatever answers Pam Bondi decides to give or not give, when the cameras are rolling and the record is open and 5 members of her own party are sitting across from her, waiting to hear the truth.